Request be agreed to, and I give the call to the member for Canberra.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. And I'm very pleased to make my contribution to the debate of the address in reply, which is, of course, in response to the election result. And though it has taken many months to get to my turn, as this debate is one that most people want to speak on, it is nonetheless an important speech to make, and I'm very pleased to have the opportunity. The address in reply debate is, of course, the one in which the new members of the Parliament give their very first speech, and I want to acknowledge the wonderful speeches by many of my new colleagues elected this term, including the new member Filingiari, who's here in the chamber, and just what an amazing range of perspectives and of aspirations and of great ideas and values that we heard from the new class of 2022 in those speeches. And of course, in the election last year, the Australian people made it very clear that they wanted a change, that they wanted a government that was committed to listening and addressing the needs of the Australian people and working for a better future. And of course, that is why many of us joined the Labor Party, and certainly why I joined the Labor Party, was because I wanted to be part of the movement that has made the differences for the people of Australia, the governments that have done the reforms and the hard work that deliver opportunities for Australians. And already, since the election in May last year, we have made so much progress in that direction on many of the things that we promised, that we took to the election. And just before coming to make this speech, we passed through the House our legislation on starting the Housing Australia Future Fund, because we know that housing is so central to the health, dignity and prosperity of Australians, and that so many Australians, not least my constituents here in Canberra, are struggling with housing costs at the moment. We have made medicines cheaper for many Australians who were struggling to afford these essentials. And we have delivered 10 days of paid domestic violence leave. We have made recommendations that have led to an increase in the minimum wage and also an increase for aged care workers that was much needed. We have begun much overdue climate action, which is something that I know the people of Canberra is absolutely top of their list, and one of the most important things that we need to address. And I'm incredibly proud of the things that we have so far achieved and that we will continue to achieve and work on in this government. Also, the establishment of a National Anti-Corruption Commission, which I know is so important. So many people at the moment are concerned about accountability and the integrity of Parliament and politicians. So it is a really important change. I also, in this address in reply debate, want to reflect personally on my election as the member for Canberra, my re-election, and just to thank everyone who put their trust in me to represent them in this place, and to again say that this is not something that I take for granted or take lightly, that responsibility weighs very heavily on me, and I want to continue to make my very best effort to listen to the things that matter to you and to advocate for our city, our community in this place. And as part of that, I've established this term, the Canberra Forum, which is a deliberative panel, an Australian first actually, where through a deliberative democracy model run by Democracy Co, 40 randomly selected Canberrans are debating a range of issues, and I have committed to bring their recommendations on the topics which they choose into this place to advocate in the Parliament and in our Labor caucus. And at the point we're at the moment, the issues that they are looking at are climate change, issues around equity of access to services, and also around community voices being heard in politics. So they will refine those topics further, but I'm so proud to represent a community for whom these things are so top of mind, very altruistic issues that not just affecting our local community but our nation and our world. And I'll be very proud to continue to advocate on those sorts of issues in this place. I also want to take the opportunity to everyone who supported my campaign, to my wonderful staff, Karen, Hamish, Mick, Radmilla, and Andrew, and all the work that they did, and also all of the Labor members and other volunteers who gave their time so generously to support the campaign in the seat of Canberra. And the conversations that they had were, very important in gaining people's support. And, it is those conversations all around the country that change governments and change the country. So thank you to all those volunteers who supported Labor out there. Your first speech to the Parliament is definitely a very important one, and one that you may have thought about your whole life in one sense. I sort of see it as an opportunity for the member to talk about the things that have driven them to be in this place. And the things that they are committed to advocating on. And also in writing mine, I think I saw it very much as a promise to my electorate of the things that I would always advocate on, and also a promise to myself that those are the things that I will, never see as less important as long as I have the great privilege and opportunity to be in this place. And so I want to take this opportunity to sort of restate my commitment on some of those issues. Issues that were key to my speech were actually climate action, and I've been proud to advocate, and now very proud to be a part of a government that is actually delivering on that action. That I have spent so many speeches in the last term crying out for action on climate change, which my constituents are so very active on, and I thank them for all their advocacy as well. But the issues that really drove me to want to be in Parliament are issues around social justice and poverty and inequality. And my background is as an economist who began in analysing poverty and inequality at NATSEM, the National Centre for Social and Economic Modelling, and looking at those impacts on households and individuals of policy, particularly social security policy and tax policy. And I've also always been a very active volunteer in the community space in Canberra, and also when I lived in Sydney, and I've spent a lot of time talking with people experiencing disadvantage in our community. And something that is very important to me, and that I really always want to be talking about in this place, is the importance of our social security system, and the fact that it is the most powerful tool that governments have to address poverty and inequality. That when we have an adequate social safety net, that it says so much about our society. We claim that we are an egalitarian society, and mostly we are. I would say Australians really do want to see everyone getting a fair go, and they don't like to see people really suffering because of bad luck, because they don't have a job, because they, for whatever reason, are doing it tough. And I think that Australians want to see governments really supporting people in our community who can't always support themselves through work. When the COVID pandemic began, we saw a very powerful example of this, where through the coronavirus supplement, income support payments, including JobSeeker, were increased, and we saw poverty actually go down in that time. As we entered our first recession in decades, where we would have expected poverty to explode as a result, we actually saw poverty go down. And anecdotally, we saw the difference that it made to people's lives as they could do things that they hadn't been able to do for a very long time. like buy healthy foods, like go and get a haircut or new clothes or whatever it was. But, since then, we have not seen a significant permanent increase to that payment. And poverty persists in Australia at significant levels. Around 1 in 8 people in Australia are in poverty, and around 1 in 6 children. And I think as a nation, this is something that we can do more to address. And I think this is something that Australians want to get behind. But it has taken many, many years, and we've not seen the action we need to increase the unemployment benefit. I think it's safe to say that various campaigns have been going on to increase the unemployment benefit, formerly New Start, now Job Seeker, for at least 20 years, or certainly as long as I have been in the social policy space. And we know, as I say, that this is one of the most powerful things that a government can do to get people out of poverty. And I talked in my first speech about former Prime Minister Bob Hawke, and he did many, many wonderful things for this country that are celebrated. But his commitment that by 1990 no Australian child would live in poverty is something that is often ridiculed. But what is less known is that a bunch of changes that he then made to the social security system and to child support actually reduced child poverty by around 80%. Such is the power of the social security system. Also, Labor very proudly, under the Gillard government, increased the age pension and lifted around 1 million pensioners out of poverty. This is a wonderful thing. And I think it's important to note as well that when people on low incomes actually spend the greatest proportion of their incomes. So when we invest in giving these people on income support payments an increase, such as with the coronavirus supplement, that money goes straight back into the economy because they are buying the essentials that they need. I want to note as well, as someone who does have a background in poverty analysis, that there's a lot of discussion about poverty, and poverty essentially has two meanings. In the sense that of the lived experience of poverty, poverty is going without. Poverty is being failed by our system. Poverty, as one person put it to me, is choosing between baby food and tampons. But often what we're talking about with poverty is about poverty lines and rates that are decided based on the distribution of income more broadly. And I think the meaning of that can be lost a little bit in that it's not actually necessarily the best measure of what people need to have a decent standard of living. It is a reflection of the broader distribution of incomes, and normally half of the median income or the average for a particular type of household, such as a single person or a couple with children. And so it's not as simple as saying, well, frankly, I feel it is as simple as to say that we don't want Australians to be living in poverty, and I think that is something that most in the community would agree with. It's not as simple as to say that the rate should be at the poverty line, because the poverty line is a somewhat arbitrary measure. And these are things that really need to be looked at with regard to a range of things, such as the minimum wage, such as other social security payments. For example, there's long been, the fact that a pension, which is for someone who, like for example, the age pension is for someone who is likely to be on that payment for life, whereas an unemployment benefit is essentially meant to be for people in between jobs. And so there is a rationale for why that might be a higher payment than a shorter term payment. But also we have a problem if people are spending many, many years on the job seeker payment. It is supposed to be a payment to cover a gap in between jobs, and we do have relatively low unemployment at the moment, and therefore, people who might be on there might have particular barriers as to why they're finding it very, very hard to find a job. And based on that, I feel that we should probably look at whether that is in fact the best payment for them, or perhaps they should be on a more permanent or different type of payment. I also feel that people in the community are concerned about mutual obligations on people receiving a job seeker payment that are too punitive and can actually make it difficult for them to actually get to the objective of finding a job. But I think these are discussions that we as a nation need to have about whether we are happy for 1 in 8 Australians to live in poverty and 1 in 6 children, or whether these are things that as a priority we really want to see addressed. And as I say, this is something my constituents raise with me a lot too. And particularly in Canberra, I think there's a view that Canberra is a relatively well-off place, which is true. We do have high average incomes and low unemployment. It makes it a very difficult place to be poor. And when I talk to the community services in my electorate, it's clear that the demand on them is absolutely increasing, and we're seeing new groups of people seeking that support that they hadn't seen before. And that in many ways, these community groups run off the generous donations and volunteer time of community members are in many ways filling a gap in the social safety net. And something that really sticks in my mind was when I was told by someone at a local service at St John's Care here in Canberra, who do incredible work, that sometimes the best thing that they can give someone is money to register their car so that they can continue sleeping in it. And I think that we can do a lot better than that. I hope as a nation we can do a lot better than that here in our nation's capital and around the country. And, you know, that is not an isolated story. I hear many stories like that from these hardworking community organisations. So I do hope that as a nation we continue a discussion about poverty and about inequality and about what governments can do about these things. And I know personally I commit to continuing to talk about these issues as long as I'm in this place. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.